ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله تبارك وتعالى عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه وبارك وسلم تسليما كثيرا كثيرا أما بعد. We were discussing background and history of the compilation of Hadith. And we talked about how in the time of the Prophet ﷺ himself, and then in the time of the Sahaba, many efforts, extensive efforts were made to preserve and compile ahadith. And we mentioned perhaps over a dozen compilations of hadith that were present in the time of Sahaba radiallahu anhum ajma'in. From the likes of Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu, Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anhu, the collection of Ali radiallahu anhu. Now, moving forward, in the time of the Khulafa Rashideen, just like efforts were made to compile and preserve the Quran, efforts were simultaneously going on in spreading and advancing the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this continued, and the knowledge of hadith spread, so that by the time Ali radiallahu anhu's era arrived, thousands of tabi'een had learned a hadith from the Sahaba by memorization and by documenting them. Ali radiallahu anhu was one of the people who was precautious in the quoting and narrating of a hadith. But as he saw that people are misusing a hadith or misinterpreting a hadith or quoting a hadith that don't really have a basis, so he began to encourage the spreading of a hadith and documenting, writing, compiling, and passing this knowledge on. And this continued till the time of Umar bin Abdul Aziz rahmatullah alayhi. Now, we mentioned that Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, who was the predecessor of Umar bin Abdul Aziz, he had a compilation of the riwayat of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu in his possession. Umar bin Abdul Aziz rahimahullah is from the same family. Now, in his time, he felt the need for concentrated efforts. And he wanted people to focus on this and devote their time. So he wrote a letter to all the major scholars of that time. For example, Abu Bakr ibn Hazm, rahimahullah, who was the Qadi, who was the Chief Justice of Medina Munawwara at that time. He wrote a letter to him, and this is mentioned in Sahih al-Bukhari. And he wrote to him saying that انظر ما كان من حديث رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فاكتبه فإني خفت دروس العلم وذهاب العلماء. I would like you to take a look at what narrations, teachings of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam you can find. And I would like you to document all of them, meaning start compiling them in some sort of a organized, categorized fashion. Because I am afraid that knowledge will begin to fade and the bearers of this knowledge will soon leave us. This letter was addressed to Abu Bakr ibn Hazm, which Imam Bukhari has mentioned in his Sahih. But when we look at the Muwatta of Imam Malik, we find the same letter being addressed to Imam Zuhri rahmatullahi, who was another great muhaddith of that time. And similar instructions were given to him, except that in that narration it's mentioned that Umar bin Abdul Aziz wrote copies of this same letter to all of the places that were under Muslim rule, all the scholars of the Muslim world, to compile the hadith that they had received, that they had memorized, collected, whatever they had available. He wanted people to start compiling seriously the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So with this began the third major era or phase of the compilation of hadith. And this is what happened in the time of Umar bin Abdul Aziz rahimahullah. So as per his instructions, Qadi Abu Bakr ibn Hazm rahimahullah started compiling the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. But before he could complete this and submit it to Amir al-Mu'mineen, he had passed away. But his compilations were left behind. Salim bin Abdullah rahimahullah had also compiled the compilation of ahadith that he had received from the Sahaba. Imam Zuhri rahimahullah started compiling ahadith, and he actually sent his compilations to Umar bin Abdul Aziz rahimahullah, who then took these compilations and had copies made, and then had copies of these distributed to all the Islamic states. Similarly, Imam Makhul rahimahullah was a tabi'i, and he had also had a chance to benefit from many Sahaba. So he compiled his collections of ahadith, and Umar bin Abdul Aziz rahimahullah was sent these copies. Similarly, Imam Sha'bi rahimahullah, another tabi'i, Amir ibn Sharahil. This was a man of very extensive knowledge, very profound knowledge. He used to say that if I want, I can recite poetry from my memory for days and days on end, and the poetry that I have memorized will not finish. Can you imagine somebody reciting poetry morning, evening, but what he has memorized does not finish? And he says that I have never heard something that I've wanted to memorize and then forgotten it afterwards. And I have never read anything that I wanted to memorize that I forgot afterwards. So he also compiled, and this was the first time that hadith were categorized, compiled in chapters. He made chapters of the hadith, and then he had these sent to Umar bin Abdul Aziz rahimahullah. He was also a judge appointed by Umar bin Abdul Aziz rahimahullah. Now Umar bin Abdul Aziz rahimahullah passed away in the year 101 after Hijrah, which means that all of this work was done in the first century of Islam. So, what some people claim that ahadith only started being compiled in the 3rd century of Islam, it's completely false. And people use this argument to somehow make people believe that ahadith are not reliable. The collections were compiled much later. Therefore, you should only trust the Quran. And we talked a little bit about this in the first couple of the sessions of this series. And we answered those questions. Now the 2nd century of Islam has started. So, along with the other Islamic sciences, the science of hadith also became more widespread and developed and fine-tuned. The first compilation in this phase of hadith history, The first compilation that has been recorded by historians is the compilation of Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, which is called Kitabul Athar. Kitabul Athar is also the first book of hadith to be compiled on the chapters of fiqh. For example, all the ahadith of salat, all the hadith of tahara, the hadith of zakat and siyam, and so on and so forth. This was the first time in history that a book of hadith had been compiled in this manner, and this was one of the first organized compilations of hadith. It's the first collection of this century. There are different versions of this. Versions meaning different copies of this. Because Imam Abu Hanifa had three famous students. The first one being Imam Abu Yusuf, the second one Imam Muhammad, and the third one Imam Zufar. So each of them narrated Kitab al-Athar from Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah. So you will find Kitab al-Athar, and it will say of Imam Abu Yusuf, Kitab al-Athar of Imam Muhammad. It means these are those riwayat that Imam Abu Yusuf heard from Imam Abu Hanifa. And these are the riwayat that Imam Muhammad heard from Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah. Soon after this, Imam Malik rahimahullah compiled his Muwatta after being requested by the king to compile whatever ahadith he could for ahkam. And it is established in history that Imam Malik rahimahullah benefited from the books of Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi. And at that time, the compiled work of Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi was Kitab al-Athar. So you can say, it's safe to say, that Kitab al-Athar served as a model and a foundation for the Muwatta of Imam Malik rahimahullah. We also find a book by the name of Musnad Abi Hanifa. Remember, Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah is a tabi'i. So he's right up there in that category of people who have seen the Sahaba. Even though he was very young and he did not take a hadith directly from Sahaba, he was too young for that. But he had seen them, and then he took a hadith from the major students of Sahaba. In any case, Musnad Abi Hanifa is in fact not a work that Imam Abu Hanifa compiled, but these are ahadith that he narrated and different students put them together, compiled them. And Hafiz Khawarizmi rahimahullah, he compiled all of these masanid, all of these different marwiyat, narrations of Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah alayh, and put them together in a book called Jami'a Masanid al-Imam al-A'zam. The Muwatta of Imam Malik rahimahullah, which as I mentioned was compiled soon after this, gained a great deal of popularity and acceptance in the Muslim world, especially in the region of Hijaz, especially in the region of Medina Munawwara. And Imam Malik rahmatullahi was known as Imam Dar al-Hijrah, the Imam of the land of Hijrah. And the kings of his time wanted to make this Muwatta the canon, the law by which all Islamic rulings are given. Like the manual for law. All decisions will be made based on this book. But Imam Malik rahimahullah declined this. In fact, when the king said, I would like a copy of this to be hung on the Kaaba, so everyone can see that this is the basis for all our decisions, he declined. He said, no. There are many other ahadith. There are many athar of Sahaba. There are many fatwas of Sahaba. And there are people who know them and people who have knowledge of them. And their decisions are also correct. It would not be fair to force people to do everything just according to one madhab. This was his. It takes a very big person to say something like that. Somebody who has no interest in dunya, no interest in building a following, no interest in being well known. It takes somebody who is very, very close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and who has made a special bargain, a special deal with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to say these kinds of things. Another compilation was the compilation of Imam Ma'mar ibn Rashid rahimahullah. The Jami' of Ma'mar ibn Rashid. So he is a contemporary of Imam Malik rahmatullahi alayhi, meaning he lived in his time. And in his time, his book also gained a lot of popularity, and then in later years, his book became unavailable. It became obsolete, and people no longer had access to it. Interesting point while I'm talking about this. There was a great scholar in the time of Imam Malik rahimahullah, who also started compiling a book called the Muwatta. Now Imam Malik rahimahullah took apparently about 16 years to compile his book. This other Imam beat him to it, and he compiled his Muwatta faster than Imam Malik did. So when this happened, somebody told Imam Malik that, what's the point of your book now? Someone else has already done it. Somebody beat you to it. And now people will not benefit from your book. One book has already come out. It will go into the public. People will start using it. And then you bring another one after that. People will say, well, we already have one. Why do we need another one? So at that point, Imam Malik rahmatullahi made a very interesting comment. He said, الَّذِي كَانَ لِلَّهِ بَقِيًّا. He said, the compilation that was written only for the sake of Allah shall remain in this world. That is the one that shall last. So, history saw that it was just a very short amount of time had passed before that first Muwatta that the other person had written, it became completely obsolete. And today, if I were to mention the name, you would not even know the name. No one talks about it, and no one is reading it, and it may be found somewhere in the world. It may be preserved somewhere. But the Muwatta of Imam Malik rahimahullah has been studied by anyone worthy of being called a scholar. It is taught in every institution. And no one's scholarship can be complete unless and until they study the Muwatta of Imam Malik rahimahullah. This is called qabuliyah. This is called acceptance by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So a book that was written well over 1,000 years ago is still being not just read, but it's being adored. It's being served. People are still writing commentaries on it and doing beautiful things with this book. Imam Sufyan Thawri, rahimahullah, he also compiled a book called The Jami' of Sufyan al-Thawri. And Imam Shafi rahmatullahi mentioned that he benefited a great deal from this book, from the riwayat mentioned in this book. Ibn Jurayj rahimahullah was also a great muhaddith of that era. He also compiled a book called the Sunan. Waqi' ibn al-Jarrah rahimahullah, Ustad, the Shaykh of Imam Shafi rahmatullahi, he also had a compilation called the Sunan. Abdullah ibn Mubarak rahimahullah, he's from the Atba'u Tabi'in, from the people who saw the Tabi'in, great muhaddith of his time. He compiled a book called Kitab al-Zuhud, a book about disinterest in this world, a book to take people's attention away from worldly things. This book is present and it can be found and read. It's a very beautiful book. So in this manner, with these great A'immah, these great Imams at the forefront, the work on Hadith continued. And thus the 2nd century of Islam became a time where a Hadith were not just being narrated, but they were being transmitted and preserved in a very organized form. Then the 3rd century of Islam starts. And in this century, because time has elapsed, 2 centuries have passed since the Prophet ﷺ's time. So obviously, now every hadith which is narrated by a chain of narrators, those chains which are called asnad or asanid, these chains are getting longer. First it was a simple matter. So-and-so tabi'i narrates from a sahabi who narrates from Rasulullah ﷺ. Now those tabi'een are gone. Their students remain. So so-and-so narrates from so-and-so who heard the tabi'i, who heard the sahabi, who heard the Prophet ﷺ. And then as more time elapses, another person is added, then another is added, then another is added. 2 centuries is a long time. So the chains of narration are getting longer and longer. In this era, the muhaddithin started focusing on setting standards by which these ahadith would be weighed. Before that, it was very easy. There were only one or two people in the chain, and everyone knew who they were. But now, with tens of thousands of people narrating a hadith, you have to be careful. Which one is authentic, which one is not authentic? And that authenticity was based on the people that are narrating. And we'll talk a little bit about that in the future sessions, inshallah, about what those standards were, what those criteria were. But this is the golden age of hadith, where the muhaddithin that we know today, Imam Bukhari, Imam Muslim, Imam Tirmidhi, Imam Abu Dawood, Imam Ibn Majah, and Imam Nasai, and these great muhaddithin did their works and brought their compilations to the ummah. And it took a great deal of effort. This was the same era where Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal rahimahullah compiled his compilations, the most well-known of which is the Musnad of Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal. This is a huge book that he compiled from a collection of 750,000 ahadith that he knew. He selected 40,000, roughly 40,000 ahadith, and put them together in this book. And the sequence that he used, the organization that he used was different. It was not in chapters, it was not according to fiqh or ahkam, but this was based on who narrated it, which sahabi narrated it. So, for example, he would take the compilations, the ahadith of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, and all the narrations that he had from Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he joined them together. And like this, in alphabetical order, you will find one sahabi at a time. If you want to know what sahabi narrated how many ahadith, so you go to Musnad Ahmad ibn Hanbal, you open it up and see that, okay, Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal from this sahabi, he has mentioned this many hundred ahadith, this many dozen ahadith, and you'll find names of sahaba, you do not even know that they were sahaba. Of course, it does not have every single hadith by these sahaba. Like I said, he extracted it from a collection of 750,000. So obviously, this does not represent the marwiyat, the narrations of all the sahaba, but it is a huge compilation. Later on, this book was organized to make it easier to find the hadith, because if you don't know the subject of the hadith, or if you know the subject of the hadith but you don't know who narrated it, it's very hard to find the hadith. So afterwards, people re-categorized those ahadith and put them into the format of fiqhi chapters. So now it's very easy, just like if you want to find a hadith in any other book of hadith, you can now go to these. The most famous one is Al-Fath al-Rabbani. Al-Fath al-Rabbani is a recategorization of the ahadith of Musnad of Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal rahimahullah. Let's talk a little bit about some of these great muhaddithin. We hear their names, we hear the names of their books, but who were they and what were they about? So, some glimpses into the lives of these people. Let's start with Imam Malik, rahimahullah. The Muwatta of Imam Malik is known, at that time especially, it was known Asahul Kutubi Ba'da Kitabillah. This is the most authentic book after the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the first book to ever have that title. Afterwards, when the Sahih of Imam Bukhari rahimahullah was compiled, then this title was given to Sahih al-Bukhari. But that was over a century after. And some scholars, especially Maliki scholars, they still find that the Muwatta of Imam Malik is more Sahih than the Sahih of Imam Bukhari. Why? Because the chains are so short and everyone knows who these people are. And in fact, if it were not for some ahadith that Imam Malik has mentioned without a chain, he says, Balaghani, it has reached me that the Prophet ﷺ said. It has reached me that so-and-so Sahabi said. It has reached me that the people of Medina did this. Now those he has mentioned ta'liqan, or they're called balaghat. Those narrations where Imam Malik doesn't mention a chain. Now because it is not possible for us to know who he narrated it from, so it remains a question mark. We know that Imam Malik only takes a hadith from the most authentic people. We know that. But because it's unknown, that's why the status of Muwatta, it comes down a little bit. Otherwise, there are many scholars who debate that no, it's still the most sahih book after the Quran. And they have many, many reasons, in fact, that they give why the Muwatta Imam Malik is and should be given preference even over Sahih al-Bukhari. But those are academic discussions. We don't want to get into those right now. Imam Malik rahimahullah was at-tabu' at-tabi'i. So his name was Malik, his father's name was Anas, and the father of Anas was also Malik. So his grandfather Malik was a tabi'i, and because he saw his grandfather, that makes him a tabi'i. And his great-grandfather was a sahabi. They were originally from Yemen. In the time of the Prophet ﷺ, his great-grandfather moved to Medina and then they remained there, they settled there. So, his father took a great deal of care in his tarbiyah, paid attention to every little thing. So once, while Imam Malik was taking his lessons from his father, he slipped, he made a mistake as a child. So his father told him that this mistake that you have made, you forgot the answer, or you mixed up the answer, it's because of the time you spent playing outside with pigeons. This is why you have made this mistake. So after that, he stopped playing altogether. He said, no, I cannot afford to make a mistake in matters of deen. This is how a child is being trained. So he did not really travel for the sake of learning knowledge, because he was in the seat, he was at the seat of knowledge itself. He was in Medina Munawwara, where the great students of the Tabi'is were still present. So he took his time and devoted his life to learning from these people. We mentioned how the Khalifa Abu Ja'far, he asked Imam Malik rahimahullah to compile this book, and he wanted to enforce the teachings of this book on everyone. Imam Malik rahimahullah did compile the book, but he strongly disagreed with using this to enforce the laws and the rulings on people. Imam Malik rahimahullah said at that time that, look, I have studied a hadith from one aspect. There are others who have studied it from other aspects. Therefore, their rulings are also different, but they're valid. I would like that the scholars who have taken from the Tabi'in and from the Sahaba, who are still present and are authorities in deen, wherever they may be, people should just follow them. Instead of everyone reverting back to one place, everyone should follow them. So, that way, the scholars of every city will be benefited from, and knowledge will spread. And this way, it will be very difficult to convey one single message to each and every single person, one line of thinking to each and every single person. He said it's not practical. I don't think it will happen. Imam Malik rahimahullah was also well known for his deep respect and reverence for hadith and for knowledge. When he used to sit in dars, he would not move. He would sit still. and he would not bother or care about what's happening around him. And there are many incidents of this. Similarly, he felt that knowledge and the people of knowledge should not have to bow to other people, regardless of their position and their status, their worldly status. That's why when the king requested him to come and read his Muwatta to his children, Imam Malik rahmatullahi flatly refused. Al-ilmu yu'ta wa la ya'ti. Knowledge is approached, it does not go to people. If you want knowledge, you come to the knowledge. Knowledge is not going to go knocking on your door. And he would then be requested that, okay, fine, can you give the royal family a special place to sit in your class? He refused this also. He said, no. In my class, there is no preferential treatment. They will come and sit where they find a spot. And that's the end of it. If they want knowledge, this is how they're going to have to learn it. Otherwise, they're not going to learn knowledge. They're going to learn something else. Even this knowledge will feed their egos and feed their appetite to be respected and their appetite to be appreciated, their appetite to be pampered. And I'm not here for that. Scholars are in the business of this. There were some occasions where Imam Malik rahmatullahi was persecuted and even beaten because of certain rulings that he passed, certain fatwas that he gave. People didn't like it. The rulers of his time didn't like it. But he said, I'm not going to change my decision. And this has always been the way of the people of Haqq. The Muwatta Imam Malik rahmatullahi contains hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. It contains narratives of the Sahaba. It also contains the legal opinions of the Sahaba, the fatwa of the Sahaba radiallahu anhu, as well as some of the tabi'is. So it also has fatwas of ulama and scholars, muhaddithin. So it is mentioned that Imam Malik rahmatullahi spent 40 years learning hadith and learning knowledge. And the Muwatta is a nice summary. It was a nice summary of that. And there are many students who took from Imam Malik rahimahullah. That's why you find many editions of the Muwatta of Imam Malik. So, why is that? Because with one class or with one batch, Imam Malik rahmatullahi might have recited a certain number of hadith or taught a certain number of hadith. In another batch, he might have added some ahadith. He might have taken out some ahadith. He might have narrated them from different chains that he had. That's why you find different versions. The most famous one is the riwayah of Yahya ibn Yahya. And that's what is still known as the Muwatta of Imam Malik. But even perhaps more well known than that is the Muwatta of Imam Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani, who was a student of Imam Hanifa rahmatullahi and was also a student of Imam Malik rahmatullahi. Just like Imam Shafi rahmatullahi was a student of Imam Abu Yusuf, he was a student of the student of Imam Abu Hanifa, and he was also a student of Imam Malik. In any case, these are some basic facts about the great Imam Malik rahimahullah. So in the next couple of sessions, inshallah, we'll go over the history of some of these great muhaddithin, just to create a stronger link and connection between us, a familiarity, because this is our history. This is all a part of how knowledge reached us. So it makes sense for us to know about it, to get familiar with it so that we can appreciate it, we can appreciate the knowledge and appreciate the people who brought this knowledge to us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, subhanakallah wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.